Our guest today is making her first appearance on Hold 'em Accountable. Joining us is Gabrianna Gratzol, the Democratic candidate for Indiana State Senate District 11. District 11 stretches across portions of Elkhart and St. Joseph counties, including communities like Elkhart, Mishawaka, Granger, Bristol, and the surrounding townships. It is a district built by manufacturing, skilled trades, small businesses, healthcare, and a proud tradition of organized labor. It's also a district facing many of the same challenges we hear about all across Indiana: affordability, healthcare, workforce shortages, and ensuring every family has the opportunity to succeed. Gabrianna brings a perspective we don't often see in state politics. She's a factory worker, a community organizer, a young parent, and someone whose own experiences navigating the workplace have shaped her views on workers' rights and economic opportunity. She says those experiences inspired her to step into public service and advocate for Hoosiers who feel like their voices aren't being heard. Today, we'll talk about those experiences, her service, and advocate for Hoosiers who feel like their voices aren't being heard. We will talk about those experiences, her vision for Senate District 11, why she believes she's the right person to represent Northern Indiana in the state Senate. Gabrianna, welcome to Hold 'em Accountable.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
For viewers meeting you for the first time, tell us your story. Who is Gabrianna, and what led you to become a candidate for the Indiana State Senate?
Yeah, so I I was raised in a super Christian, very very like fundamentalist Christian nationalist household. And it's funny, I don't even know that my parents would have like identified as either of those things. It was more the media we consume, like the culture around the religion definitely pulled in that direction. But yeah, raised very religious, very sheltered, very isolated. I was homeschooled from seventh grade to graduation. And during that time, all my social interactions were either in my really small church youth group or Bible quizzing across the state. Um, and then I entered the workforce and got to know people. Like after graduation, I entered the workforce, got to know people in my community outside of the small bubble that I existed in, and my views and my passions just changed. My priorities changed. My values never did. I feel like what I took away from being raised in faith and with like the teachings of Jesus really kind of shaped. I mean, those values, I was drawn to that because of the values that I hold, like compassion and helping others, and um, then being shown what that can look like outside of a religious framework. I was really started to deconstruct like the religious aspect, and I tried to look for ways that I could do good in my community outside of just religion. So I worked retail for a few years, met my husband, got established. And then I had the privilege of working in behavioral health for several years. I worked with kids or teenagers with mental health challenges in residential treatment, which was incredible. The things that I learned in that time, the culture shock, going from being very sheltered to working with people from every kind of background, every adverse living situation. It was really formative for me in like my early adulthood, and I loved every minute of it. But the burnout is insane because when you're doing residential care, it is round the clock. It is understaffed, undersupported, and underpaid. So I ended up switching from residential treatment to working with children with autism, with more structured hours, a regular, basically 9 to 5 work week, Monday through Friday, and I loved it. I've always loved kids, always loved working with kids. I was the kid in youth group who was constantly volunteering to work in children's church and like help out with the kids there, and I babysat. Um, and then working in like that treatment and that therapeutic environment, just continued to help me grow as a person and taught me just the impact that early intervention can have when you're working with small kids and like vulnerable kids. And it was amazing, one of the best experiences of my life. But eventually, there is a limit to what you can do in that field without a college degree. And at the time, I definitely felt like a college degree was not an option for me. So I ended up, I moved into factory work. I've never been afraid of hard work or getting dirty. And my husband worked at a plant, plastics manufacturing plant, making products with like custom colors. So working with like powdered pigments and coming home a different color every day. And I started working with him. We still work together. And I really value the experiences I've had there, and plan to continue having there. Um, and yeah, how I got to the state senate is like when you work in as many roles as I have, you see like every level of impact that government has and where the shortfalls are and what the impacts of legislation are. From what I was seeing, the people who were making those decisions, they had no real grasp on what the outcomes would be from their decisions and the bills that they would write. And when people would go to testify and tell them, hey, I am an expert in my field and this is what the impact of these decisions will be, all of their pleas fell on deaf ears. And so I just felt very compelled to replace one of those sets of ears with ears that are more receptive.
You've spent much of your campaign talking about working families and worker protections. How have your own life experiences influenced the way you look at this public policy?
Yeah. So there was a brief time while working with my husband, there was an opportunity for me to try working at a wood shop, doing a different job. There was a substantial pay increase. So I decided to try it out. I've always loved carpentry. I used to do carpentry projects with my mom. Like it was something that I enjoyed. So um, I I interviewed, started, it was great. Everything was going really well. And then I found out I was pregnant shortly after I started. I immediately disclosed my pregnancy to my female supervisor. We discussed a plan around it. I knew going into it, it was going to be a high risk pregnancy. So I knew there would be additional doctor's visits and maybe work restrictions, but I knew those wouldn't be coming for a while. And so we talked about it and we agreed, like, as long as my work ethic continued the way it had started, that everything was going to be fine. And it was great. I received nothing but glowing feedback from everybody that I worked under. And then the time came for me to disclose my pregnancy to the rest of the leadership at that plant. And very shortly after, I was fired. And the reason that they gave in the meeting where they terminated me was that they felt I was taking advantage of my pregnancy restrictions. When I had men come up to me and like take objects out of my hands because they're like, "Oh, you don't have to carry that. Like you're pregnant. You need to be careful." It was devastating. I was scared, like not only financially, but even like for my health. Like during that time period, I lost my insurance and was supposed to get it after a 90-day probationary period. So now I was facing not only a loss of a job, but also an uninsured high-risk pregnancy. And for anybody who has experienced any kind of specialist treatment, um, it is insanely expensive. So I did the things you're supposed to do. I applied for unemployment, and it gave me enough to, with my husband's help, keep a roof over our head and meet our basic needs. But I also applied for Medicaid. The process was long, and it wasn't until well into my third trimester that I found out if I even qualified for Medicaid. And then I got the rejection letter saying that I did not qualify because my husband made less than $100 more in the annual income. So now I'm facing tens of thousands of dollars of medical debt because every safeguard that was supposed to be in place to catch us when we fell for no fault of our own failed us. And in that process, I really, there's the feelings when you have to apply for assistance, and you've been raised being told that people who accept assistance from the government are abusing a system or they're living off of our tax dollars. And I never bought into that. I knew plenty of people in my own family who were receiving services, and I saw how hard they worked and I saw how little it gave them. And then to have been a person who did everything quote unquote right by the book, and to see how quickly everything can go wrong, it really kind of bolstered my motivation to do something to fix it instead of just trying to steer conversations, shaming people. 'Cause before that, when people would talk poorly about people on assistance, I would just oh no, I'd share personal stories to try to humanize people. But now I'm no, this is a fight we have to actually fight with actions and not just public sentiment.
Across Indiana, we're hearing the same concerns: housing, groceries, healthcare, utilities, childcare. What are the families you're meeting in District 11 telling you is putting the most pressure on their budgets? And what should the Indiana General Assembly actually do about it?
Yeah, so the things that I hear, it's different for every family, but the common themes are utility costs are too high, housing costs are too high, or there just aren't any real options for them. Um, and then health insurance premiums, people are telling me at their door yeah, minimum wage should be raised, but I make well over the minimum wage, but what I actually take home in my paycheck, it's nothing. It's the healthcare premiums are out of control, and then they go to the doctor and they have a high deductible plan that covers nothing until they reach that deductible. And they're why do I even have insurance? I would save money if I didn't have insurance. And childcare. Childcare is the other thing. Um, the doors I'm knocking, they are panicking over what to do about childcare. I have a friend personally, one of my really close friends who, when the childcare vouchers were cut, her son lost his spot in his daycare, and they had to scramble. She is a para who works in public schools with children with additional needs, and she was looking at whether or not she was going to have to leave the workforce to take care of her son so that she could, because they couldn't afford any other options. And as far as what the state needs to do about it, we need to put we need to put the child care vouchers back in place. We need universal pre-K. We need to fund our public schools, and we need to hold utility companies accountable for price gouging, and we need to adjust the corporate tax rate. And these companies that hire us for far less than our labor is worth, and then provide benefits that they check a box, but they do nothing to truly benefit us, they should be held to account.
I've asked this a couple times from a different candidate. What are your thoughts about expanding the Healthy Indiana plan?
Absolutely. However, I would also add to that the state needs to pay their share of their medical bills, because in our area, we have a huge healthcare organization, Beacon, and they it's kind of a catch-22 because yes, they're buying up everything. Like, it's very hard to practice independently in the area. But they are a nonprofit model of hospital. I have experienced great things from Beacon. I've actually worked for Beacon when I was fired. The job that I got during my pregnancy before I went back to the factory job that I had left was working with them, and they treated me great. I saw the assistance programs they had for patients. Like, no one got turned away because they couldn't pay. Like, they would work out a payment plan regardless of your situation, because they were big enough to do that. However, many of their doctors' offices had to stop accepting Medicaid, and the reason was because the state does not pay enough. They don't pay their bills. And like, I think that like, if you have an organization as large as Beacon who is having to drop Medicaid patients because of the state not paying, what is that doing to rural communities where more patients rely on Medicaid, and the providers, they don't have a lot of options. Like, they need to cover their costs as well. So yes, I think expanding the Healthy Indiana plan is a great idea. I think a public option a public option for healthcare on a state level is a good first step. Honestly, when it comes to healthcare, I think it needs to be handled on the federal level so that it's not just tax dollars continuing to subsidize the ultra wealthy. And however, we need to save people now, and people are dying from a lack of healthcare.
District 11 has a long history of manufacturing and organized labor. How do we protect existing manufacturing jobs while preparing Indiana for the industries of the future?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not by putting in data center after data center. Now, I hear the argument made by certain labor groups about how, they provide jobs during the construction phase, but I think that sacrificing long-term sustainability for short-term gain is not the answer. I think as a state, we need to do better at protecting unions, making it easier to democratize workplaces. I think that is how we benefit unions, not by selling all of our land for data centers and selling out our communities and our health, and our infrastructure for, honestly, a industry that does not contribute anything. They're so in the hole, like they do not make money. But as far as like automation goes, I think that automation should benefit the laborer. What we've seen through the past, I don't know how many decades, or since like the Industrial Revolution, and more recently automating like assembly lines, we are forcing human labor to keep up with machines and trying to replace positions with machines. And I think that when there's sacrifice to be made, it should be made from the people who feel that sacrifice less. The people on the floor, if we are putting in some kind of system to streamline a task, there are ways that human labor can be distributed throughout that task. It doesn't overwork the person running the system, if that makes sense. But yeah, Indiana prides itself on being a business-focused, manufacturing-focused state. And the way they do that is by handing out tax abatements like candy and incentive structures like candy. Our local government has a model that they follow that has been really effective. At least our city government, they have criteria for their tax abatements. A friend of mine went to the meeting where they reviewed all of those the other day while I was at work. And he, like, they laid out, okay, how many jobs are you creating? What benefits are being offered? Are you paying a living wage? I think that tax abatements and incentives for business can be a tool and should be a tool that we use, but we really need to raise the bar because I'm personally being sick of sold out, I am sick of being sold out to the highest bidder for the appearance of growth and the appearance of development.
Education continues to dominate discussions at the State House. As someone from a younger generation, where do you believe Indiana is succeeding? And where is it falling short when it comes to preparing students for the future?
Yeah, so the models of success that I've seen in Indiana are all being done on a very localized level. And I think that that is reflective of the fact that we need to shift the state's role in education to a funding and a support role instead of control. And I think that local governments should be in charge of the budgeting, the curriculum. But right now, these local governments are being forced to beg their neighbors for money through referendums instead of being funded by the state because the state is passing budget bills like SCA 1 that we're still trying to figure out. We're scrambling on local and county levels to make up for the gaps that created. Our public school systems are facing low enrollment because school choice and charter schools and private schools. The private school voucher program has been devastating. And also, removing the income cap is horrible. Like, why are we paying for the tuition of children who would be sent to those schools regardless of whether or not we were paying that tuition? And while their kids are going to whatever school they want with zero accountability from the government that is being like their education's being funded by our tax dollars, our kids are being placed in classrooms that are the classroom sizes are getting out of control. Teachers are not able to spend the amount of time that they need to with their kids. And just the lack of support is smothering our public education system. And you can't tell me it's not by design because the people who are writing these campaign checks to these politicians are all benefiting from the voucher program or from charter schools.
You're part of a younger generation stepping into politics. Do you believe your generation approaches government differently than previous generations? If so, how?
I do believe that we approach it differently than current generations. I think, I don't know, there were a lot of gaps in my education just because my schooling experience was from 7th grade to graduation. I was given curriculum on a computer and my parents both worked full time and I was basically left to figure it out. And it was accredited curriculum, but the more I've learned since graduating, the more I realized just how incomplete it was. And I think there are echoes of my generation's approach to politics and to reform and to a better way forward that they have been practiced by previous generations, and we can look to those as a framework of how to move forward. But I don't know, for me personally, and for a lot of my friends growing up and seeing like the 2008 recession, the collapse, the bailouts after, especially in this area, we're big RV, we're a big RV industry. We are a hub. And the thing about a recreational vehicle is it is a luxury. It's a choice. So when the economy is hurting, our economy feels that immediately. We deal with massive layoffs. A lot of it is honestly scheduled in seasonally. The RV industry is rough to work in. It's very unpredictable, very stop and go. But when you add in a factor like recession, it can be devastating because like these families, they know that while they're working, they're in a boom period, and they budget for that. They budget for the downtime, for the layoffs, for the cut hours. But when you have a long-term economic distress, we can't rely on that startup to come when it normally would. And so like we just felt the effects of that very acutely. And then we saw the federal government bailing out the people who put us in that position in the first place. And for me, I think that watching that and like seeing the effects of it, seeing, the bailouts, it shifted my or formed my opinion of where we need to hold people accountable and who should be making sacrifices, if that makes sense.
You'll be facing Republican Brian Schmolzer in November after a competitive Republican primary. Without making it personal, what do you believe is the biggest philosophical difference between the vision you're offering voters and the vision your opponent is offering?
Yes. So Dr. Schmutzler is a parent. He has 2 young kids, and I see in his platform an attempt to address some of the problems. The 2 main platform points that I see him pushing are eliminating property taxes, and a statement from his website is that he thinks that school choice is a good start, but it doesn't go far enough. He wants the state to push for homeschooling and micro schools. He wants to put it's not a direct quote, but he wants to put the money in the hands of the parents and have them figure it out. Um, and I can validate the idea that parents generally know what's best for their kids. I can validate the idea that we need a more affordable Indiana, and the property tax situation is out of control, mainly at the fault of assessors, not the rate, if that makes sense. Also, the fact that our property taxes fund our schools, our fire, and our police. Eliminating property taxes without securing the funding for those pillars, along with other things, but without securing those pillars, would effectively defund the police, leave communities more vulnerable to fire and emergencies, and eliminate public education. So there are ways to address affordability that don't completely gut our society. I think that the fact that when we call 911, we can count on a response, even though in some rural communities that response is way, way longer than it should be to get that response. I think I think we can all agree across the aisle that is that is a good thing. I think that with education, one of the reasons that I personally push so hard for public education is the accountability aspect. Um, as I mentioned with my homeschooling, I dealt with levels of neglect. I personally don't think a 13-year-old should be home alone for like 8 or more hours a day and just told to like figure it out. And for 6 years, I think there were a lot of things going on in my home that had I been exposed to other influences, other stimuli, I might have had a very different outcome. I also think that there were things that could have been called out, you know, that could have been addressed that outside observers could have noticed. And one thing that strikes me, with his focus and his platform and feeling the long-term effects of that, I think that creating more opportunities for that to happen and more opportunities for I know a lot of kids who were homeschooled who had exceptional experiences. I look at someone like Ethan Sweetland May running for state senate, and like he's incredible. He benefited from homeschooling. I know more people who they really struggled in a public school setting or just in a classroom setting, and they were able to get their needs met through homeschooling by involved parents. And I think it should be an option for sure. However, I don't think the state should be funding it, and I don't think that people use it to avoid accountability and get away with mistreating their kids. That is a fact. We've had a few cases, even in my area, where um, someone called to complain about like the smell that was coming out of a house. And when first responders came to check it out, just do like a wellness check, they were met with a horrific hoarding situation and an animal hoarding situation. And there were minors in that house who, like, the first question everyone asked were like, how did no one know that these kids were living in this situation? And the answer was that this family claimed that they homeschooled their kids, but they were just being like locked away. And I know that that's an extreme example. I know that those cases are few and far between. I'm not here to fearmonger. I'm not here to blow up extreme cases and try to make that the framework. But I do think that we need to live in reality. And reality tells us that we need accountability, we need community, we need exposure to a diverse assortment of facts, of experiences. We benefit when we experience building relationships with people with backgrounds that don't look like ours. And that's why I'm just so for public education, because it is such a formative time where you do get to build meaningful relationships with people that you wouldn't otherwise interact with.
Indiana's legislature has been a Republican supermajority. If elected, you'll have to work with legislators who may disagree with you on many issues. How do you build relationships and accomplish meaningful legislation in that environment?
Yeah, so I had an interesting experience on the day of the primary. I was at a polling location, just greeting voters as they were coming in, and I ran into Senator Rogers, who was, the opponent in the Republican primary race for the district. And I personally, between the two of them, was definitely rooting for Rogers because even though we disagree fundamentally on several things, and a lot of the legislation that she passes, I don't agree with. I think it's harmful. I know that she is capable of passing good legislation. And one of the things I brought up was like, hey, I appreciate the work that you do. Like, I appreciate she got a bill passed for expanding healthcare benefits for firefighters exposed to hazardous conditions on the job. That is a very good thing, even though it came from a person who I usually disagree with. When she introduced a bill that the community was very, very against, she pulled that bill after public feedback let her know that that is not how they wanted to be represented. She voted no on redistricting because she felt that it was wrong. She felt like the maps were terrible. She listened to the outcry from her constituents. Those are things that I respect about her. And even though I could go on a 30-minute tirade about the things that she does that I do not agree with, I chose to talk to her about the things that she did that I thought were really helpful. And we had a great, respectful conversation. I wished her luck. She wished me luck. And we even exchanged numbers. And I think that was like how we treated each other as potential opponents. I think that people are more receptive to positive feedback. They're more receptive to being told having the things pointed out to them that they are doing well. And we have data to back that up. That is an evidence-based practice that I learned through behavioral health that I've carried it with me since I've left, and it's served me well and served my friends well. We really need to get back to a level of civility. And I'm not talking about like capitulating on things that are morally indefensible. I'm talking about learning how to talk to one another like we're not on a social media comment section. Like, at the end of the day, I'm not going to convince someone that they are wrong about something that they believe from like a value standpoint is right. But what I can do is validate the values that lead them to that conclusion, and then try to find an unproblematic middle, where we can achieve some kind of progress. I think that I have been able to do that in professional settings and personal settings. And I really think that, based on some of the interactions I've had with Republican legislators, I think that's something that I will be able to do well in the General Assembly.
My final question is one that I ask every first-time candidate. Why you and why now?
Well, the short of it is that the Indiana State Senate is made up of people who employ other people. It is not made up of employees. When you are beholden to the whims of someone else, when like you are going to be the most impacted by the legislation that's being drafted and the most vulnerable to the impacts. Like, that's the thing. We're all, to an extent, like, we're all equally impacted by a lot of the things that get passed in the state house, but there are things that are going to impact like my family and my friends that we don't have any shielding from. We don't have any privilege to like deflect those consequences. And I think that having someone in that space who understands the gravity of the bills being passed, because I watched 2 years of the live streams of the Senate sessions and the House sessions, obviously not all of them because, oh my God, but a large portion of them. And I've watched as I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where they brought up to me like, yeah, like I tried to do this and I couldn't do it, or like, wow, I got this bill and it's this much higher. And I was like, oh, hey, that's the state politics. Like, that is the state legislature. And they're like, I never would have guessed. I didn't know. And I really think that having that voice in that space, like there's never been a time in my lifetime where it's been more important. Especially like with the data centers coming in, with the surveillance issues that we're facing. And I really think that having a young candidate in a space where legislators are trying to figure out how to legislate like big tech, the impacts of social media. Like, I've listened to some of these sessions where they do talk about the impacts of social media. They talk about the impacts of like technology. And we need people in those spaces who like grew up with that, who understand it better, who see the impacts that it has on their friends, like their friends' kids. And I just really feel like we need people like me and like so many of the people that I'm running with in that room. Because yeah, it's not just me. It's how many people there are like me. Like, I'm not anything special. Like, I'm really not. And that is why I need to be there. We need normal people. We need regular people. We need people who understand what the majority of Hoosiers are dealing with on a daily basis.
Gabrianna, it's now time for hold 'em or fold 'em. I'll read 6 statements. If you agree, you hold them. If you disagree, you fold them. Feel free to briefly explain your answer with a word or two. Healthcare is a human right, and every Hoosier should have access to affordable healthcare.
Hold 'em.
Indiana should fully fund public schools before expanding private school voucher programs.
Hold 'em.
Indiana should raise the minimum wage and automatically adjust it for inflation.
Hold 'em.
Workers should have the freedom to organize and collectively bargain without unnecessary barriers.
Hold 'em.
The Indiana General Assembly should strengthen protections against discrimination for LGBTQIA+ Hoosiers.
Hold 'em.
Corporate PAC money has too much influence on state politics, and campaign finance reform should be a priority.
Hold 'em.
Gabrianna, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Running for public office takes courage. It means putting your ideas, your values, and often your personal story before the public. I appreciate your willingness to do that and to answer our questions directly. Senate District 11 represents a vibrant part of northern Indiana, from Elkhart and Mishawaka to Granger, Bristol, and the surrounding communities. The voters there deserve to hear directly from every candidate asking for their trust, and I appreciate you helping make that possible. I wish you the very best as your campaign continues into November. And to everyone watching and listening, whether you're joining us from Elkhart, Mishawaka, Bristol, or anywhere in between, thank you for spending part of your day with us. No matter where you call home, democracy depends on people who are willing to listen, think critically, ask tough questions, and participate. Until next time, stay informed, ask questions, and as always, hold them accountable.